So this is one of the more unique ideas I've seen in a shooter in a while. In Crisol, you're hurting yourself just to survive, and the whole game is wrapped in faith, sacrifice, and ritual. That idea touches everything you do in this. I got this a few weeks early from Blumhouse, so I've spent a bit of time with it now, and it's doing some really interesting things. There's even a point that genuinely got under my skin for a bit, which really doesn't happen often anymore. So, what is Crisol Theater of Idols? So before getting into how any of this plays, I think it helps to know who's actually behind it. This is published by Blumhouse Games, which is the game publishing arm of Blumhouse, the same company that's been behind a lot of modern horror films over the years. They started the game side kinda recently, and the way they've approached it so far feels pretty consistent with how they handle horror in general. Blumhouse has always been drawn to strong ideas, stuff that's contained, focused, and built around a central concept that carries the whole experience. When they stepped into games, it feels like they carried that same mindset with them. It seems like they're backing games that have a really clear identity from the jump, and they aren't just throwing money at big projects. This one is developed by Vermila Studios, which is a smaller studio out of Madrid. And you can really feel that scale, but in a good way. The game is very locked into what it wants to be, and it commits to that pretty hard. Right away, the themes in this are obvious. Faith, blood, sacrifice, gods. All that is built directly into how the game actually works. Your blood is part of the combat loop. It's part of how you survive. The world itself is steeped in religious imagery, idols, and ritual, and none of that feels decorative. It all feeds into the same core idea. That's where this feels like a natural fit for Blumhouse. The horror here comes from discomfort that's baked into the experience itself. You're constantly aware of what things cost. You're aware of what you're giving up just to keep moving forward. And that idea runs through the mechanics, the setting, the tone, everything. So the main thing people are going to latch onto for this game is just how the combat works. Your blood is tied directly into fighting. Every time you reload, you're giving some of it up just to keep going. And the first time I saw that, I just thought that was a cool idea. Reloading takes time. You're standing there holding the button while the gun drains your blood, and you can see your health go down as it happens. Every bullet that goes into the gun costs you a chunk of it, so it's something you're immediately aware of. And that starts to matter pretty much as soon as you're in a real fight, especially when there's more than one enemy on you. You're paying attention to your ammo, your health, where you're standing, where enemies are, and whether you actually have enough room to reload without getting hit. Your health basically becomes part of the ammo management, and that just sits in the back of your head the entire time. One thing that really stood out is I never really held off on reloading in the middle of fights. You know, if I needed the bullets, I needed to reload. But between fights is where it got a bit more interesting. Say you clear a fight and you're sitting at half health, and your gun is empty. Reloading right there means you're going to hurt yourself again before you even see the next enemy. And there are these syringes throughout the game that let you restore blood. So using those, you start thinking about timing. When do I reload? Do I wait until I have enough syringes? Do I move forward with an empty weapon for a bit just to avoid taking that hit? And that becomes especially true with stronger weapons. Some guns take very little blood to reload. Others take a lot more. So there were stretches where I'd use something like a shotgun in a fight, fire off what I needed, and then just not reload it. Even after the fight was over, I didn't want to take that damage yet. I'd wait until I had a few syringes ready or until I absolutely needed that weapon again. So combat starts turning into planning. You're thinking ahead, you're deciding when you're willing to pay the cost and when you're not. Weapon switching really plays into that a lot also. You're swapping guns based on how much blood you're willing to give up at that moment, not just on their range or their damage. Because reloading is slow. For some guns it's really slow. You have to commit to it. You're holding the button and watching the blood tank fill on the gun while your health drains. Once you start, you're locked in if you want to fully reload. So sometimes it makes more sense just to switch weapons to delay that cost a little longer. There is a knife as well, and it fits into that same idea of cost, just in a smaller way. You can use it for melee attacks and for parrying, but the more you use it, the blade dulls. When that happens, you have to spend a resource, which is gas, and find one of these motorcycle machines to sharpen it before it's really effective again.
Sharper than ever.
I use the parry here and there, and it definitely has its place, but it never became something I built my fights around. It felt more like an extra option you could lean on if you needed it, not really something that replaced the core flow of combat. But really early on is when all these mechanics stopped feeling like a neat idea, and they started reshaping how I actually played. The pistol's the first weapon, and it eases you into it, the idea. Reloading it takes a small amount of blood. It just stings a little, but it's manageable. Then you get a more powerful weapon and see how much more it takes. And that's where the idea really clicks. In addition to balancing your ammo and health, this is adding a lot of layers that most shooters just don't have. That realization slowed everything down for me. Most fights had me standing my ground or backing away, creating space, being careful about where I was when I pulled the trigger. Even though it's a first-person shooter, it plays very deliberately. You can't just run and gun or rush enemies in this. Even aiming really reinforces that. You line your reticle up perfectly on an enemy's head, but if you start tapping the fire button too quickly, shots will just drift. They'll go wide or high even though your aim never moved. You actually have to stop, breathe, and let the character settle, and then take the shot. You're forced into these pauses, these small moments of restraint, just to make sure each bullet does what you want it to do. Over time, the combat really just felt like clearing the danger in front of you so you can keep moving. It never really felt triumphant, or like a power fantasy or anything. Because even when fights ended, the cost never stopped. You'd still be reloading, you'd still be hurting yourself just to be ready for whatever's next. So there was never this clean release, it was more like, okay, that part's done, and then you move on. And I think there's a lot of really cool meaning behind this whole mechanic. Because my interpretation of it was, the game frames your blood as something granted by a god, so reloading felt like an offering, not a punishment. Every time you did it, you were choosing to give something back just to continue, just to endure the fight. And that whole feeling or idea got a lot heavier through the act itself, through reloading and how invasive it became. And that's where the weapons themselves start to matter, because each one asks for that offering in a different way. One of the things I kept looking forward to in this was just finding new weapons, and not really even for the reasons you'd expect. When you pick one up, it starts out as a completely normal gun, something plain, something you'd expect. But the second it's in your hands, it changes, blood spreads across it, the design shifts, and it turns into something that looks godlike, gold trim, ritual markings, and somewhere on it there's always a tank for blood. Honestly, a lot of the excitement for me wasn't even the weapon itself, it was just seeing what it would turn into. And that same attention carries over into the actual reload animations. That's when the game really commits to this whole idea. Every weapon reloads differently, and each one shows pain and devotion in a very specific way. The pistol uses these small spikes that press into your palm. It's quick, it's sharp, and it still hurts. The double-barreled shotgun flips open and you jam your entire palm into it. That one feels heavier, it's a lot more forceful. But the one that stuck with me the most was the sniper rifle. The bolt lifts up and turns into a spike, and you drive the side of your hand into it, and you jerk your wrist back and forward to chamber the shot, and then just rip your hand off the spike. Watching that happen over and over makes it really clear what kind of toll this is taking. What really sells it is how that pain lines up with power. The stronger the weapon, the deeper the wound you receive. The pistol hurts, but it's manageable. The sniper rifle asks for something much more severe. You don't need to look at numbers to understand that difference. You feel it every time the animation plays out. As you keep playing, that relationship carries over into upgrading weapons too. You find these silver bulls throughout the game, and those are what you use to improve the guns you picked up. Things like damage, fire rate, capacity, and even how fast the weapon pulls blood from you during reload. So even when you're making a gun stronger, the game keeps tying that power back to your body. A faster reload still means blood leaving you quicker. More damage still means a heavier cost behind it. By the time you use these weapons for a while, they stop feeling cool in the traditional sense. They have this heavy feeling. Every reload reminds you that using more power means giving more of yourself. And that idea never fades into the background. It stays front and center the entire time. Hey, just real quick, if you made it this far into the video, thanks for hanging out with me for a bit. I really do appreciate it. If you're enjoying the video, consider subbing, leaving a like, and dropping a comment. Let me know if this is a game that you've been excited for, or if you're planning on playing it. And if you're new to the channel and liking how I talk about games, feel free to check out some of the other videos. There's a lot more horror on the channel, especially older stuff, which is usually what I focus on. This one's a bit different from what I normally cover. I've been wanting to branch into indie games for a while now, and when Blumhouse reached out, I felt like it was a sign to finally do that. We'll be back to older games after this one, but I do hope you all still enjoy it. And just a quick shout out to all the channel members as well. I really appreciate you. But let's get back into Crisol and look at the level structure and pacing and the massive amount of puzzles in this game.
The path is blocked.
So the way the game structures its chapters didn't really click with me right away. Early on, especially in the first chapter, it honestly just felt like I was wandering around for a bit. I knew there was something I was supposed to be doing, but it wasn't immediately clear how all the pieces fit together. That changed the first time I completed a full loop. You see the main issue or goal in the chapter, and then you head down one of the branching paths. Once you finish that first branch and loop back to the original area, that's when it clicks. You start to understand how the chapter is laid out and what the game is asking you to do. Each chapter has this central problem sitting at the core of it. That's always there in your head. From that hub, you go down a branch, deal with whatever situation is there, and at the end of that you get a key item. The item unlocks the next branch, and then you go down that path, deal with its own situation, and get another piece. And then loop back again. You keep doing that until you've gathered what you need to either solve the main problem or gain access to it. Because of that structure, it never really felt like I was just aimlessly moving around. Even when I didn't know exactly what the end solution was yet, I always knew there was a reason I was going down a particular path. The branches feed into each other in a really deliberate way. What I liked about it is that you're always carrying the main goal with you mentally. But each branch also has its own smaller goal. Each one feels like its own little situation you need to get through. You're building towards something the whole time, even when you're focused on what's right in front of you. The chapters can run pretty long because of this, but it never felt drawn out to me. Even though you're returning to the same areas, the pressure changes depending on where you are in the chapter. Enemy placements shift, the pacing feels different, and the way you move through those areas starts to change as you make progress. It's the same space, but your relationship to it isn't static. The central hub itself doesn't really ever transform. It's more about the sense that you're stacking progress. Every time you come back, you're closer to resolving the main issue than you were before. That's what gives it weight. By the time you're reaching the end of a branch, the focus shifts away from fighting and towards figuring something out. Those moments feel more like you're dealing with a problem that needs to be solved so you can keep moving forward. You're collecting pieces, understanding how they fit together, and carrying that information back with you. As you start to get deeper into a chapter, a lot of the optional stuff starts pulling at your attention. One of the biggest examples is the crows. You'll hear one calling somewhere nearby, and once you recognize that sound, you know there's a cage hidden around in that area. If you take the time to track it down and free the crow, you get a permanent discount at the shop. It starts small, it's 1% per crow, but it adds up over the course of the game. So finding more of them always feels worthwhile. That ends up changing how you move through levels. You're walking, listening, and scanning spaces more carefully. If you hear a crow, you slow down, you start checking side paths, corners, upper levels, and little areas that you might have passed by otherwise, just to see if you can figure out where it's coming from before moving on.
Fly high. Do not look back.
The Solari brooches fit into that same kind of rhythm. They're usually tucked away in side areas or behind something that requires an extra step to reach. When you find one, you know it's tied to something back at the fair, the main hub level between chapters. Those medallions unlock chests that give you money and other items, which feed into upgrading yourself over time. So as you're working through a chapter, you're constantly making small decisions. Do you keep pushing forward to the next branch, or do you slow down and chase something optional because you know it'll pay off later? That thought is always sitting there while you're moving through the level. And all that ties back into how the chapter is structured. You're still building towards the main goal, but you're also keeping track of smaller things along the way. Sounds you noticed, or paths you didn't take yet, areas you might want to revisit. The pressure comes from holding all that in your head at once and deciding how to move through it.
Should have thought of that earlier, kid. The Hook Gang doesn't forgive a single coin. So tell me, what should we do with you?
One of the things that really surprised me the most about this game is how serious it is about its puzzles. These aren't just quick interruptions or simple lock and key things. When the game puts a puzzle in front of you, it expects your full attention. The first big one that really stopped me is a good example. You're given this central puzzle tied to multiple rooms, and the only way forward is to start paying attention. You're reading through pages of a diary, learning names, picking up on relationships, and then physically walking through different rooms, taking in how each space is laid out and what's inside of it. The game is asking you to connect written context to visual clues over and over again.
Threatened to turn us in. What can we do? If her mother finds out, we're as good as dead.
This isn't in any way something you can rush. You can't brute force it. I had to slow way down and reread the same pages multiple times, and keep going back and forth between the text and the environment. That puzzle ended up taking me quite a while to finish, because it demanded patience and focus, but it never felt unfair. And even while it's visually intimidating, it never crossed into frustration for me. It always felt solvable, just demanding. The second puzzle that really stood out hits in a completely different way. The first time you see it, it's just overwhelming. A massive dial covered in symbols and domino pieces. And the game gives you no immediate explanation. You're meant to observe first. Nearby, there's another room that shows how these pieces are used, and once you start connecting those dots, the puzzle shifts from being confusing to being mechanical. Working through that one felt more like solving a Rubik's Cube. Even when you understand what needs to happen, you still have to physically perform it in the right order. The puzzle has layers, and those layers affect each other. You move one thing, another reacts. So most of these puzzles are never about just knowing the answer, it's about executing it correctly. That one didn't stop me for as long, but it stuck with me more. It was my favorite puzzle in the game. And those are just two examples. The game keeps throwing different kinds of puzzles at you the whole way through. Some lean more into reading and context, some ask you to really pay attention to how spaces are laid out. Some are more mechanical and physical. They're all doing different things, and because of that, they don't ever blur together. Even when they look intimidating, none of them ever felt unfair to me. Every time I got stuck, it felt like the answer was there somewhere, and I just needed to stop and think for a minute. That back and forth between tension and focus fits really naturally into the pacing. You come out of combat drained, exploration keeps you alert, and then the puzzles ask you to slow down and concentrate. The progress feels earned because you're giving something different each time. Another thing that really stood out to me while playing it is how the game lets fear build over time. It kind of settles in through how enemies move, how they sound, and how long the game is willing to sit in that feeling with you. A lot of that comes from the sound design. Since so many of the enemies are statues, there's always this creaking and clanking when they move. It sounds like wood or stone grinding against itself, like something barely holding together. The way they move feels the same way. It's uneven, a little awkward, like they're stumbling forward. Most of the time, you're figuring out where enemies are just by listening, because you usually hear them before you ever see them. The environment here is doing work the whole time too. It rains a lot, so you're hearing water hitting roofs, wood, metal, all kinds of stuff. Buildings creak, things shift around. A lot of those sounds are very similar to the enemy movement. You're always stopping for a second, trying to figure out what you're actually hearing. Even when you're standing still, you're listening. And then there's one enemy type that really stuck with me. The way they move and sound immediately changes how tense you feel in the area. They move low to the ground and really fast, and the sound they make has this wet, uneven rhythm. Hearing that nearby is enough to get your attention before you even know where they are. Those sections lean hard on space and lighting too. Visibility drops off a lot, and you'll hear those footsteps well before you see anything. Sometimes you catch a shape in the dark just for a second, like something peeking around a corner, and then it's just gone. That split-second moment where your brain registers it is what sticks with you. What really makes those stretches work for me is how long they go on. You're moving carefully, listening the entire time, staying alert even when nothing's actively happening. Your guard stays up, and by the time you move past it, you feel worn down in a way that really sticks with you. Even the way enemies tie into progression fits that tone. When you defeat them, you're getting something from them that feeds into your abilities later on. It keeps everything in that same supernatural loop. You give blood to keep fighting, you make it through the encounter, and what you take from it carries forward.
You're my best customer.
Before I get deep into this part, I'm not going to spoil anything. I just want to talk about what the story is doing and what kind of game this is story-wise. So in Crisol, you play as Gabriel. He's a soldier and he's sent on a mission by the sun god. The game takes place in Hispania, on this island called Tormentosa, and pretty much immediately you can tell belief and worship are just part of the world. You don't really get introduced to that stuff slowly, you're just in it. Early on in the game you die, and that happens really fast, and that's where the whole relationship with the god starts. You're brought back by the sun god, and in order to keep going, you have to ask for its blood. From that point forward, that idea kind of hangs over everything. Blood is what lets you fight, it's what keeps you alive. It's the thing you're constantly interacting with. After that, the goal itself is pretty straightforward. You're carrying out a divine mission while moving through this island that's full of idols and rituals and cult imagery. That stuff isn't hidden or subtle, it's just how the place works. After each chapter, the game stops for a bit and gives you these larger cutscenes focused on the god and its history. These parts don't ever feel rushed. They feel like the game taking its time to explain the history to you before moving on.
To art, music, and literature. Enchanted by the imagination of his children, the sun took human form and founded a city he would soon call home.
Most of the time though, you're just playing, exploring, fighting, solving puzzles, and the story is already there in what you're doing. You're giving blood to survive, you're taking damage just to keep moving forward. Progress comes from sticking with it and pushing through. As you keep going, the story and the mechanics start to feel like the same thing. What the game is about matches what it's asking you to do. Faith ends up feeling like something you're carrying with you the whole time, not something you stop and think about separately.
Going to be quick. I enjoy watching you suffer.
By the time you're deeper into it, it feels like you're just living inside that belief system. It keeps asking something from you, and the game lets that feeling sit there with you without trying to explain it away. I do want to talk a bit about where a lot of this stuff comes from in the real world, because once I started reading about it, a lot of things in the game started clicking for me in a way I wasn't really expecting. Crisol pulls a lot from Spanish folklore and religious imagery, and that's something the developers have been pretty open about. And this isn't just general horror religion stuff. It's very specifically tied to Spanish culture and traditions. And I feel like once you understand that, the world starts to feel way more intentional. And a big part of that comes from religious art and ritual. Stuff like wooden religious statues, public processions through towns, and ceremonies that have been happening for hundreds of years. That kind of imagery carries a lot of weight culturally, and you can feel that weight in the game. Even though Crisol takes place in a fictional setting, it still feels connected to something real. The levels feel like they've been shaped by belief over a long period of time. And that's where Holy Week comes into the picture, because it's one of the most recognizable religious traditions in Spain. Semana Santa happens every year all across the country, and it's a huge deal. Entire cities shut down for it. There are these long processions through the streets with groups of people walking together carrying these massive floats. Those floats are called pasos, and they hold these incredibly detailed wooden sculptures. A lot of them are centuries old. They show scenes of suffering, devotion, and sacrifice, and they're meant to look emotional and intense. These things are carried through streets slowly while people walk alongside them. You don't just see them in a museum. In places like Seville and Malaga, this stuff is just part of growing up. They see it every year. You hear the music and the footsteps. It becomes part of how you understand religion there and history and community, even if you're not religious yourself. There's also all the visual stuff that comes with this. The robes, the pointed hoods, the candles, the way people move together during processions. It's very specific imagery, and has been part of Spanish culture for generations. When you start to recognize that, a lot of Crisol's visuals make more sense. The wooden statues in the game especially hit different once you know the background. In Spain, those kinds of figures are things that people see up close, things that are carried and touched and honored. They're part of living traditions. That's why they feel so heavy when you see similar things like that show up in the game. The developers at Vermila have talked about wanting to pull from that cultural language without copying anything directly. The idea wasn't really to recreate a real religious practice, it was more about taking the feeling behind them and reshaping it into something that fits the game's world. That's why everything in Crisol feels like it belongs together. The idols, rituals, the cult-like elements. It all feels like it comes from the same belief system, like worship has been happening there for a very long time and has shaped everything around it. What really stood out to me is how that changes the kind of horror the game goes for. You're surrounded by these things that already feel meaningful. You're walking through levels that feel ceremonial. You're interacting with objects that feel like they were meant to be respected. That creates this steady, uncomfortable feeling that really sits with you. Spanish religious traditions mix community, art, and history in a really deep way. It's something people grow up around and gets repeated year after year. Crisol taps into that familiarity and pushes it into a darker territory, but while still keeping that sense of weight behind it. And once I understood where those ideas were coming from, the game really felt richer to me. The imagery didn't feel random, it was tied to something. The world felt more specific. The themes of faith, sacrifice, and devotion felt like they were coming from a real place instead of just being there for atmosphere. It's one of those situations where learning about the inspirations don't pull you out of the game. It actually makes the whole experience hit harder. So, after going over all of this, who's this game for? Crisol is a slow shooter. It takes its time. Fights play out at a measured pace and you're rarely rushing forward. The closest comparison that kept popping up into my head was something like BioShock. You're moving carefully, picking your moments, watching your resources, and paying attention to the space you're in while you fight. That pace carries through the entire experience. You're stopping a lot, looking around and listening, thinking things through before acting. The game gives you that space, and it feels built around the idea that you're actually going to use it. And if you like puzzles, especially puzzles that ask you to slow down and really work things out in your head, there's a lot here to appreciate. They're given real weight. You're meant to engage with them and sit with them for a bit and figure things out at your own pace. They feel like part of the journey rather than something tacked on. The horror side of things leans into discomfort that really sticks with you. The game spends a lot of time sitting in that tension, asking you to manage cost and restraint over long stretches of time. You feel that in combat, and how you progress, and in how the whole thing is paced. If you're someone who likes games where the mechanics and the themes feel really closely tied together, where what you're doing lines up with what the game is about, this feels like something that you'll probably like. It knows what it wants to do, and it stays focused on that. This experience asks for your patience, and it rewards paying attention. It gives you time to think instead of just pushing you forward constantly. If you've made it all the way to the end of the video, I really do appreciate you a lot. Thank you for hanging out with me for a while. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like, dropping a comment, and subbing if you haven't already. It really does help a lot. And if you're watching on mobile, consider hitting the hype button. It gives the video hype points and it essentially tells the algorithm, hey, this video is good, more people should see it. But if you're new to the channel also and you made it to the end, welcome to the save room. I bet there might be some other horror stuff there you might like. Thanks again to Blumhouse for sending me this game early. I was not really expecting to get an email from them, but I was pretty excited to see it. And I know this one's a bit different than what I usually do, but I really do hope you guys still like it. But thanks again for everything. I really appreciate you all. But as always, I'll see y'all later.